My loves, welcome back to my channel. For those who are new, hola, my name is Jaji and welcome to my channel. So today we are going to do a little bit different. We are going to sit down and do makeup, but also talk about crime and murders. And this is going to be like a new series that I want to do. You know, doing playing with makeup plus doing crime, or talk about crime stories that, you know, has happened. So if you like these types of videos, please don't forget to like and subscribe and let me know if this is a series that you guys are interested in me doing. But yeah, so we're just going to jump right in. As we're going to talk about the crime, I'm going to do makeup, and then everything that I use I'll leave linked down below so that you guys can know the products that I'm using. But it's easier for me to just talk about the story and then just list everything down below of what I used. This case I want to talk about is the case of Shanda Shower. I'm sorry if I butcher the names, but I'm so horrible at pronouncing names. But no disrespect to the family whatsoever. Okay, so Shanda was born June 6, 1979 in Pineville, Kentucky, to Stephen and Jacqueline, and she was 12 years old. Her parents decided to divorce, and Shanda's mom remarried, and her and her family moved to Louisville. So Shanda was described as a very active girl. She was very shy, so she was more of a follower than a leader. So that's kind of important into the story. So then in 1991 of June, her mother divorced and they moved to New Albania, Indiana, and she enrolled in Hazelwood Middle School. So Shanda was a pretty good student in school. She always had good grades. She always kept up with her schoolwork. Like I said, she was always a good student. She wasn't really of the popular girls. She kept to herself. So one day Shanda had a friend, and her friend had just broken up with her boyfriend, and the girl had this ring that she wanted to give back to her boyfriend, but you know, as an ex, you don't want to look at, you know, your exes or after a breakup and everything. So Shanda, because she was a really nice friend, she was always very thoughtful, Shanda volunteered to give this ring back to the girl's boyfriends. The ring back to her boyfriend. To her friend's boyfriend, I'm sorry. So the guy got pretty mad at Shanda for some reason and started arguing with her. So Shanda just kind of argued back, and the guy had this cousin named Amanda, and she was 14 years old at the time, and she confronted Shanda, and she pushed Shanda or whatever, and they got into a fight. So the school gave them both after school detention, and once they were in detention, Amanda and Shanda kind of like laughed it off and became friends after that. And Amanda kind of apologized and said that she just always has her guard up or whatever, because she doesn't like to take shit from anybody. So they started hanging out, and they started becoming really good friends. Even like outside of school, they started becoming really close. And Shanda's mom started not to like, well, she really didn't like Amanda, because this is the girl that they got into a school fight and they got detention. So she kind of had her guard up about Amanda. But her mom finally accepted them and they soon became really, really good friends. So they started hanging out, Amanda and Shanda. And Shanda found out that Amanda was a lesbian and she had this on and off girlfriend named Melinda Loveless. Melinda was 4 years older than Shanda, and Shanda learned that they had like a very, very toxic relationship. There was always on and off. On their relationship, there was always fighting and all this nonsense. Melinda even started seeing other girls outside of their relationship, so Amanda kind of took that as they're broken up. Amanda and Shanda started becoming really close, and they even started exchanging love letters or whatever. And Shanda, let me point out that she's only 12 years old, so she doesn't have that much experience, and so she's only liked boys. So Shanda's mom kind of thought that maybe Amanda was manipulating her and kind of messing with her head, because, you know, she's 12 years old. She really didn't have any experience in any of this, so this was all kind of like new to Shanda. They started exchanging letters, and Melinda, which is 4 years older than Shanda, started becoming jealous of Shanda. Like really jealous. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of backstory on Melinda. So Melinda was born in October 28, 1975. She was the youngest of 3 daughters, and she was the daughter of Marjorie and Larry Loveless. Alright, so Melinda's father and mother, they met at a very young age. So when they first got married, he was drafted into the US Army, and when he came back, he was kind of looked at as a hero since he did go to the Vietnam War. But little does everyone know, Marjorie had some things to say about her husband. She said that he was a little pervert and he was very jealous of her. He would wear her daughter's underwears, sniff them, and even wear like her clothing and makeup, which is really weird of a man to do. So I'm thinking maybe he was like in the closet. So basically, as years went on, Melinda was very close to her father, even though her mom and him had a very abusive relationship, and Larry would beat on Marjorie in front of Melinda and her daughters, and even her older 2 sisters came out and said that Larry sexually abused them, but Melinda never admitted to any of this allegations against her dad. But the weird thing is that Larry slept with Melinda until she was 14 years old in the same bed. So what kind of father would sleep in their daughter's bed for so many years, but not, you know, their wife? So that was pretty weird. And things got really toxic, and to the point that he would come home very abusive and rape his own wife because they just weren't intimate anymore. And so since they weren't intimate anymore, he would come home drunk and basically rape his own wife. And the kids, which are his 4 daughters, would hear this in the other room. So imagine you as a little kid hearing this, and it took a really big toll on Melinda. But even though Melinda saw no wrong in her father, she loved her father, and even when her mom threatened to leave him, Melinda would throw the biggest fits, cry, and she started even hating her own mother because she wanted to divorce her father. So that took a toll on Melinda's mom as well. Even at age 9, Marjorie claimed that Larry got so drunk and he would invite his friends over and they gang raped her. So imagine, he was a very disgusting and disturbing man, and he did anything he wanted with his wife, and so she could keep her family together and keep Melinda happy. She suffered through so much physical and mental abuse. So, you know, it was just a constant battle with them every day. And then he was very lazy. He would have really good jobs and then work for a couple days and then not show up and then just quit. So basically she was the only one that was maintaining the family, and they would move from house to house, and it was very hard for them, for her own income, because she was a nurse, but she always had to ask people for money because, you know, Larry couldn't keep a job and it's hard to maintain 3 little girls. So one day Larry got really abusive, and he got really abusive with Marjorie, and he sent her to the hospital, and that's when she really filed for divorce and threatened to leave him. And he even got arrested for it because he beat her up so bad. And basically Melinda blamed her mom and hated her mom for all this. And so one day when Melinda was 14 years old, he decided to just say that this relationship was too toxic, and he decided to pack up his shit and move to Florida with his family. So he just got up and left, and he left Melinda, and Melinda took this very hard, that she had to even get therapy and all this other stuff, and she blamed her mom for this, and Melinda just couldn't accept that her dad just basically up and left her. And this is when she friended Amanda, and that's when they started having a relationship. But Amanda said that she would get very abusive mentally, physically, and just compare everything to her father, and it was just getting way too much for Amanda. But it was like they were too toxic for each other, but they loved each other, and how Melinda was, and this was basically their first lesbian, or this was their first actual relationship with each other. Melinda was very possessive over Amanda, and they didn't have a really good relationship. So long story short, in comes Shanda, and she's the beautiful new girl, and Amanda took a liking to her, and Melinda started getting really jealous of her. So they started having this relationship, and basically once they started having this relationship, Melinda saw that they were starting to get really close to each other, and she would see how Amanda will look at Shanda, and Melinda would basically kind of laugh at her, telling her, how can you like such a little girl? She's a little girl, and blah blah blah. Because, you know, Melinda was very jealous of Sandra. And then even Melinda started threatening Chandra, and basically told Chandra to stay away from Melinda, or to stay away from Amanda, and if you don't, the consequences are going to be a lot worse. But Sandra kind of basically shoved it and continued seeing Amanda. So Amanda and Chandra was starting to get a lot more closer, and Sandra grades started going to a downfall. She was failing her grades. She was forging her mom's signatures. She was just going down a bad path. So Sandra's mom, Jackie, saw the difference that was going on with her daughter. So Jackie saw the difference that was going on with her daughter. And basically her mom told Sandra that they need to stop seeing each other, that Amanda is a bad influence for her, and she forbids them to see each other and whatever. But that didn't take very long. They started seeing each other behind Jackie's back. They would write love letters and all this good stuff. And Jackie found out because she had found a letter in the mailbox that was going to Amanda from Sandra, but Sandra forgot to put a stamp on it, so it came back to sender, and Jackie read this letter. So Jackie decided to change Sandra to another school, to a Catholic school, and she changed schools, and Sandra was starting to become her regular self again. And her mom started to notice a change. Her grades were starting to come up again. She was back going into sports, and she was just becoming her old self again. So but Amanda wouldn't give up. Amanda would continue to look for Sandra, and would write her letters, call her every day. And you know, Sandra was just so busy with her life because she was on the cheerleading squad, so she really didn't have that much time to have a friendship with anybody because she was so busy with school. So but Amanda was persistent, and Amanda would just not leave her alone. And even Sandra was getting kind of like aggravated, you know, and just like annoyed that Amanda wouldn't leave her the hell alone. She even like made a comment to her friend saying that Amanda was just so persistent and wouldn't leave her alone, and she was just basically kind of getting aggravated and tired of it. So on the morning of January 11th, 1992, a farmer was going down a road, and he saw something that was kind of unusual. He saw like a red blanket, and from far away what kind of looked like a mannequin, and the mannequin was set on fire. And it was kind of a weird thing to have on the side of the road. And so he drove a little closer to see what it was. To come to find out, it was a human body that was on the side of the road, that was burnt and wrapped up. That was wrapped up in a blanket. So he quickly called the police. The police came to investigate the body, and they did confirm that it was a body of a little girl, and she was completely naked but wrapped in this red blanket, and she was so burnt to a crisp that she was they weren't able to see who she actually was until they actually ran an autopsy on her. So as they're investigating this, they have a little girl 50 miles away at a police station stating to the police, confessing that her and 3 of her friends murdered a little girl that night. But the police that were actually investigating the body at the crime scene, they thought that this was a type of witchcraft ritual, like sacrifice, because in that time era there was a lot of witchcraft and people sacrificing things to, you know, all that witchcrafting things. And they thought that how they saw the crime scene, they thought that maybe it had something to do with the witchcraft. Not far from the crime scene, there was an abandoned house that was called the Witch's Castle. And this is a place where a lot of teens would come out and hang out and do rituals and witchcraft. And basically it was like the party scene for a lot of these occults, because there was occults back then. And you know, there was a lot of different stories that was told about this witch castle. They thought that they had a strong lead. They thought that this had something to do with the witchcraft and human sacrifice. So this is what they kind of thought. So they basically took the body in for an autopsy. But while they were waiting for the dental records of the body, at 11:30 the night before, a girl came in 45 miles away from the crime scene and confessed that her and her friends murdered a little girl. This little girl was a 15-year-old named Toni Lawrence. A little bit about Toni. Toni was a very shy, quiet girl, and she had a very troubled childhood. At the age of 9, she was told, or she claimed, that a 14-year-old boy raped her. And although the police investigated this, they basically didn't do anything for this. They only gave the boy a restraint, or they only was able to give Toni a restraining order against the boy to keep away from the family. And basically that's it. So he basically got away with the crime. So Toni went into counseling, and she was just a very troubled girl after that. And this is when she started to become very promiscuous, and she would self-harm. And she even attempted to commit suicide in the 8th grade. So at the police station, she was very nervous, and she barely could keep a sentence together. She was crying and sobbing, and this went out for like over an hour until she was actually able to calm down and basically tell the story of what happened that night. She confessed that her and her friends murdered a little girl at the witch's castle that night, and that she didn't know who the little girl was. All she knew is that the little girl lived 50 miles away, and her name was Shanda. Mom and dad are divorced, so Sandra would stay weekend over at her dad's house. So that night, that weekend, it was her dad's weekend, so she was staying at her dad's house. And that night she wanted to stay up a little bit longer, watch TV, and her dad said that was okay. And as soon as she was done, then she'll need to march right upstairs, turn off the TV, march upstairs, and go straight to bed. However, when he woke up at 7 a.m. the next day, Sandra was nowhere in sight. He checked her room, the basement, and Sandra was nowhere. She wasn't anywhere. So he didn't really think nothing of it. He thought maybe she just went out with friends or something. So he basically sat down, ate breakfast, and then that's when his wife, Sandra's stepmom, woke up and was like, "Where's Sandra?" And that's when they started kind of to panic, because it was kind of out of Sandra's character to just leave and not say anything to anybody. Both got into the car and they started searching for her at her friend's house, down roads, to see maybe she was out in the street, and Sandra was nowhere on sight. So that's when they decided to go back home and call Jackie, Sandra's mother. Sandra's mom ran over to the dad's house right away, and the first thing she noticed is that Sandra's purse was on the table, and she knew immediately that something was totally wrong, because Sandra did not go anywhere without this handbag. So she immediately called the police, and she filed a missing report on her daughter Sandra. So while they're waiting for the police, Sandra's mom decided to call everybody, friends, old friends, new friends, people, teachers and everything, to see if anyone knew any news about Sandra. So she even called Amanda Huffing, I think that's her last name. She even called Amanda, and Amanda basically said, no, I don't know. I haven't heard from Sandra. I don't know anything about Sandra. So basically, Sandra's mom kind of like, she knew that maybe Amanda knew something more, but she basically threw it away because, you know, she had other people she needed to call. So at the police station, they basically got this girl, Tony, that confessed to the murder. So basically the police went back to Sandra's dad's house and gave them the news that Sandra was gone. And Sandra's mom basically knew she was gone. Hello, she filed a missing report, but the police was like, no, Sandra was murdered. Sandra's mom just went hysterical, but she didn't want to know the details of the murder, so she basically left the room, and Sandra's dad and stepmom heard the police and the details that went into the murder. Sandra's mom didn't find out of how gruesome the murder was until the next day when she heard it on the news. And basically the news stated that this little girl was murdered and she was burnt alive. So the police wanted to know more about what went on that night. So they decided to investigate Tony even more. So they're trying to get more information on Tony, and Tony basically stated that she didn't know who the girl was. All she knew is that Melinda, which was a girl that they just met that night, wanted to kill this little girl. Tony had admitted that her and Hope were going to a rock concert that night, and Hope had told Tony that she had this friend named Lori Tactic that was 2 years older than her that had a car, and she was going to take them to the concert that night. Lori had asked Hope if she had told Tony what was going to happen. So Hope turned to Tony and said, we're going to kill a little girl tonight. So basically they went to go pick up this friend, and this friend had beef with this little girl that wouldn't leave her girlfriend alone. So they got to this house, which was Melinda Loveless' house. They got to Melinda's house, and they right away went upstairs and they started changing into the clothes, and Melinda basically showed these girls the knife that she was going to threaten Shanda with. Basically, she said that she just wanted to scare Shanda away from Amanda, that she wasn't that's the only thing they were planning on doing. They were leaving, so as soon as they got into the car, that's when they came up with this plan. And basically the plan was to basically lure Chandra out of the house and and try to scare her. So they get to Chandra's dad's house, and Melinda makes Tony and Hope get out the car to get Chandra. Sandra doesn't know. Sandra opens the door, and they ask, is Chandra home? And Sandra was like, that's me. And the dad overheard. And they said, oh, Amanda is out in the car and she wants to see you. So Chandra was kind of excited because she hasn't seen Amanda in a while. So basically she got kind of excited that she wanted to see Miss Amanda. But her dad said that she could not go out. And Sandra kind of whispered to them to come back at midnight when her parents are asleep and she'll sneak out. They said okay, and they went back into the car, and Melinda kind of got mad that they wasn't able to take Sandra out, but they reassured her that when she comes back at midnight, they would get her. So these girls go to the little rock concert, and Hope and Tony kind of basically got bored and basically left the concert and waited in Lori's car while Lori and Melinda stayed and partied, and basically found these boys and started having sexual activities with these boys. So a couple hours later, Melinda and Lori come out and they basically leave to go to Sandra's house. And it's basically after midnight and they sneak up to Sandra's house. So as soon as they get to Sandra's house, Hope even got out the car and Sandra was like, hold on, let me change. And basically Hope went upstairs and even helped her get an outfit, which was so sad. Like this whole damn story just has me like. So a little bit of background about the other two girls, which is Hope Rippey and Lori Tactic. Hope Rippey was born in Madison on June 9th, 1976. She also had a very troubled childhood, and she would also cut herself and self-harm, and she would try to commit suicide. Her parents got divorced and they reunited, and they had moved away for a little bit and they moved back to this town, and that's when Hope introduced Lori to Tony. And Lori Tactic was a lot more troubled than you think. Lori Tactic was born in Madison, Indiana on October 5th, 1974. Her mother was a Pentecostal Christian and her father was a factory worker with a lot of felony convictions. Lori claimed that she was molested at least twice as a child, and that's twice as a child when she was 5 and 12, and that's when she started becoming more rebellious against her mom. And this is when she started getting into things like witchcraft and things like that, and she started dressing gothic. She would dress in all black. She would cut her hair really short. And this is when she also claimed to be possessed by a vampire. And she would dabble into things like the Ouija board and things like that. Her parents found out about her being like self-harming herself. So as soon as they found this out, they admitted her to a hospital, and the hospital diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder. After a couple of months, she was discharged from the hospital, and later she dropped out of school. So once she dropped out of school, she moved out and she was living from house to house with a lot of friends, and that's when she met Melinda Loveless. So after a couple months, she moved back home with her father, and her father bought her a car, and that's how she was able to go back and forth from her town to Melinda's town, and they got very, very close. Now, the night of the murder, we're gonna go back into the timeline. So they get Shanda changed, and Shanda goes into the car and basically was like, "Where's Amanda?" And they were like, "Oh, she's waiting for you at the witch's castle. Like, she's waiting for you there." So basically they jumped into the car, and Melinda was hiding under a blanket. So Chandra didn't see Melinda at this point. So they go into the car, and this is when Lori was basically asking Chandra about, you know, her relationship with Amanda and how sexual she is with Amanda and blah, blah, blah. So that's when Melinda basically popped out of the blanket and put a knife towards Chandra's throat and started threatening her. Now, at this point of the video, if you guys don't like to hear all the gruesome details about the crime, then I would just skip or just end it here, because it gets pretty gruesome at this point. To the witch's castle. And once they got to the witch's castle, Sandra was basically apologizing and begging Melinda to basically stop, because Melinda was basically threatening Shanda. She would not take the knife away from Shanda's throat, and basically Melinda would taunt her and say things like, oh, you have such beautiful hair, I'm gonna cut it off. You wouldn't look so pretty then if we cut that hair off. And basically Shanda was scared for her life, crying, and just was begging for Melinda to stop, and basically promised her that she would stop saying Amanda, but Melinda kind of just ignored her. Melinda basically threw Shanda out of the car with Lori, and Hope and Tony basically stayed in the car because they were pretty scared at this point, because they thought that, you know, they thought that they were just going to scare this girl, but Melinda and Lori had other plans. So Lori got some rope out of the car, and she decided to tie up Shanda's arms and legs, and that's when they started taunting her with the knife. And that's when Melinda started taking off all her jewelry, and Hope basically came out the car at this point, and they took off this Mickey Mouse watch that she had, and Hope basically grabbed the watch and kind of taunt her around with the watch. So then Lori went back into the car and took out this shirt that had like a smiley face with a bullet on its head, and basically lit it on fire. But the girls kind of got scared that someone was going to see them, so they pushed Shanda back into the car and kind of drove off because they were scared that someone was going to see them. And that's when Lori drove into a dark garbage dump by a wooded area. And basically that's when they started to torture Shanda even more. And Melinda basically beat up Shanda pretty bad, and she would like knee Shanda's mouth, and Shanda had braces, so she was bleeding from her mouth, and she would constantly just punch her and knee her in the face. And that's when they decided to strip her naked, completely naked, and they tried to cut her throat with this knife that they had, but the knife was too dull. So Hope basically came out the car again and basically held down Shanda, and that's when Melinda and Lori Tactic started stabbing her. And this is when they grabbed a rope and they basically tied it around her and strangled her until basically Shanda was unconscious, and they put her in the trunk and then told the other girls that she was dead. And they went back to Lori Tactic's house, and they cleaned themselves off, and they started drinking soda. And this is when they started hearing Shanda start screaming again, and Lori was like, I'll take care of it. And she went back outside and she stabbed her multiple times and went back upstairs and said that she was dead. So at 2:30 a.m. Melinda and Lori left to go dump the body, and Hope and Tony stayed because they said that they were very tired. So they stayed at Lori's house and fell asleep. So Lori and Shanda started driving, pulling off, and that's when they heard Shanda start crying and screaming again. So they pulled over, and that's when Lori Tactic hit her in the head with iron, and she laughed about it and basically went back in the car and told Melinda to smell it. And Melinda was like, stop, like I don't want to smell that. So then they returned back to Lori's home, and they got cleaned off again. And that's when Lori wanted to, because you know Lori played with a lot of witchcraft and spiritual and all that stuff, so she decided to read their future. And basically Lori said that their future was good, that they weren't going to get caught, and that they were basically okay to go. And that's when Lori's mom woke up and basically said, what are these girls doing here? They need to go home immediately. So Lori said, okay, I'll go drop them off at home. And that's when they left. So that's when they drove off to a burn pile, and they opened the trunk, and Tony refused to see, and that's when Hope started spraying Sandra with a Windex and said, "Not so hot now, are ya?" And basically they taunt her and closed the trunk, and they went to a gas station and bought a 2-liter Pepsi bottle, and they dumped it out and poured gas into that bottle. And that's when they drove north of Madison to Lemon Road off Route 421. Tony stayed in the car, and basically the 3 other girls got out the car and they wrapped Sandra into a red blanket into the side of the road. And where the location was, like, it seemed like they wanted to get caught, because basically they left Sandra in the middle of the road, and just a couple steps there was like a huge wooded area, so they didn't even like wanted to get rid of the body. Basically, like, they just left her body there. So they wrapped her up in a blanket, and she was still alive. Sandra was a very strong girl. She did not give up. She was still alive at this point, and that's when Hope poured gasoline all over her, and Lori and Melinda set her on fire, left. And this is when and this was already early in the morning. So they've had Sandra in this trunk and tortured her all night long. So basically it was already in the morning, and they went to McDonald's and had breakfast. And this is when one of the girls said that their sausage looked like Sandra, which is so heartbreaking. Like how can you joke like that? It's just crazy. Back to the timeline again. This is when Tony's at the police station pouring her guts out, admitting to the murder. And basically all 4 girls was arrested the next day for the murder of Sandra. And despite their ages, they were all tried as adults for the murder of Sandra. Melinda and Lori Tactic even faced the death penalty at this trial. And Tony Lawrence basically didn't do anything to basically harm Sandra. She just sat there, which is, I think, is worse, and you're not gonna do anything to stop it. So basically she just sat there. So she even got tried, and she pleaded guilty to criminal confinement, and she faced 20 years but only served 9 years, and she was released in 2000. Hope Rippey was basically, she didn't really torture Sandra, but she kind of had a little role into the murder. Like, she sprayed the Windex on her and she held her down. So she was sentenced to 60 years, but since these girls had such a bad background with physical and mental abuse and all that, they reduced her sentence to 50 years. But then she appealed, and she got reduced to 35 years. But then she only served 14 years, and then she was released in 2006. Laura and Melinda, which basically did the murder, they pleaded guilty so that they could avoid the death penalty. They both got 60 years. But Lori was released in January 2018, basically last year, and she only served 26 years. Melinda will be released next month in September 2019, and she would only be serving, so her sentence was 27 years. So she only served 27 years. So in 2005, Sandra's dad basically suffered from depression, and he suffered a lot of loss because of the murder of his child. So basically he drank himself to death, and he committed suicide, going into a deep depression after Sandra's death. And basically Jackie, which is Sandra's mom, basically said that he tried everything possible to kill himself, just not pulling the trigger. And then Melinda Loveless, during her prison time, started training dogs to basically aid disabled people. So in 2012, Jackie donated Melinda a dog in her daughter's name so that she was able to train that dog. And basically she got a lot of backlash for this, but basically she said that her daughter would have wanted this, and I guess people grieve differently, and she in her mind just thought that this is what Shanda would have wanted. And Jackie also appeared on Dr. Phil's show, and she, with her oldest daughter, that was Shanda's older sister, and they did a full interview. Even Amanda went on the show, and Hope even got on the show, and they got face-to-face. They even had like a face-to-face interview, but you can see all that on YouTube if you guys do want to see that. So yeah guys, that was the case of Sandra Scherer. I think that's her last name. Like I said, I'm so bad at pronouncing names. Please forgive me if I did butcher that name. But basically that is the whole case. The case was like crazy. Like, how can you kill a 12-year-old girl for jealousy? But you can tell that these girls just was going through a lot of stuff. So basically, if you guys want to know more, they actually came out with a book, and that you can find on Amazon, and then you can see a lot of interviews of her mom. Her mom is, you know, every day has to go through this, and Shanda was such a beautiful little girl. She was beautiful, and her life was cut too short. So yeah guys, that is the end of this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next one.